The alarm clock screamed at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before it was supposed to. Sophia's hand shot out from under the thin blanket, silencing it with practiced precision. In the darkness of her studio apartment, she could hear the Mediterranean wind rattling the shutters of her narrow window, bringing with it the smell of salt and fish from the harbor below. She didn't need light to navigate the cramped space. Her body knew every corner of this room by muscle memory alone. The water from the shower sputtered cold for the first 30 seconds, as it always did. Sophia stood under the weak stream, letting it wash away the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. 3 jobs, 7 years of this routine, 7 years of being nobody. She pressed her forehead against the chipped tiles and reminded herself why. Because nobody was safe. Nobody had a target on their back. By 5:30 a.m., she was pushing through the heavy wooden door of Café Bella Vista, the brass bell announcing her arrival, with a cheerful jingle that felt obscene at this hour. The air inside smelled of ground coffee beans and yesterday's cornetti. Giorgio, the owner, was already behind the counter, his white apron pristine, his mustache perfectly waxed. "Buongiorno, Sophia," he called out, his voice too bright for the pre-dawn darkness outside. "The espresso machine is acting temperamental again. 3rd time this week. I'll look at it." Sophia replied, tying her own apron around her waist. Her fingers worked automatically, checking the machine's pressure gauge, adjusting the grind setting. This was the language she'd learned to speak. The language of normal people with normal problems. Temperamental espresso machines, burnt cornetti, customers who complained about foam consistency. Not the language of her childhood. Not the language of blood debts and territory wars, and men who smiled while they ordered executions. The sun was climbing over the Ligurian coast when Elena arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes late as usual, her blonde hair still damp from the shower. She burst through the door like a small hurricane, all apologies and infectious energy. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. My mother called. And you know how she is? She wouldn't let me hang up, and then I couldn't find my keys, and—" Elena paused, studying Sophia's face with those perceptive green eyes. "You look terrible. Did you sleep at all?" "I slept enough," Sophia lied, turning to the customer who had just walked in. "Buongiorno, signore. What can I get you?" The morning rush came and went in its familiar blur of cappuccinos and macchiatos, of tourists asking for directions, and locals gossiping about whose daughter was dating whose son. Sophia moved through it all with quiet efficiency, invisible in the way she'd perfected. Be competent but not memorable, friendly but not familiar, present but not truly there. At 11 a.m. she untied her apron, said goodbye to Elena, who was still chattering about some party on Saturday, and walked 3 blocks through the winding cobblestone streets to Trattoria Mare e Monti. The restaurant sat in a corner near the port, its blue-painted shutters already open to catch the sea breeze. Inside, the kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos. "Sophia! Thank God!" Angelo, the head chef, didn't even look up from the pasta water he was draining. "We've got a party of 12 coming in at 1 o'clock. I need you on prep immediately." She grabbed a knife and began dicing tomatoes, her movements precise and mechanical. Around her, the kitchen staff shouted in Italian, the old ventilation system struggling to pull out the steam and heat. Her hands worked while her mind drifted to dangerous places, the places she usually kept locked away. The problem with having 3 jobs was that it left too much time for thinking. In the spaces between tasks, memories leaked through. Her father's study, mahogany and leather, and the metallic scent of gun oil. Her brother Paolo's laugh before it turned cold. The weight of the Valentini name, which once opened every door in Sicily, and now would slam them all shut forever. The night she'd witnessed her father's business associate executed in their own garden, the man's pleading replaced by the sound of cicadas in the warm summer air. She'd been 19. She'd run that very night. Sophia! Angelo's voice cut through the memory. Are you crying? What's wrong? She touched her cheek, surprised to find it wet. Just the onions, she said, even though she hadn't been cutting onions. I'm fine. Angelo studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. He was a good man, she thought. Too good to know what she really was. The lunch service ended at 3:30 p.m. Sophia walked home along the Via del Porto, past the colorful buildings with their weathered shutters and flower boxes spilling over with geraniums. Tourists posed for photos by the fountain in Piazza della Libertà. Children kicked a soccer ball down a narrow alley. An old woman in black fed stray cats from a paper bag. Normal. Everything was so beautifully, impossibly normal. In her apartment, Sophia allowed herself exactly 1 hour of rest. She lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, watching the patterns of light shift as the afternoon sun moved across the sky. Her body ached in the familiar ways, feet sore from standing, hands cramping from repetitive work, that constant tightness in her shoulders that never quite went away. But it was honest pain. Pain earned through honest work, not through the dishonest empire her family had built on extortion and violence. At 6:00 p.m., she was dressed in clean clothes and walking to her evening shift at the hotel. Hotel Ancora was a modest establishment that catered mostly to European tourists seeking authentic Italian charm on a budget. Sophia's job was simple. Clean rooms, change linens, restock amenities, disappear before guests noticed her. She worked alone, which she preferred. The silence of empty hotel rooms, the methodical routine of making beds and scrubbing bathrooms. It was meditative in its monotony. Floor by floor, room by room, erasing the traces of other people's lives while leaving no trace of her own. It was past 10 p.m. when she finally unlocked the door to her apartment again. Her legs felt like lead. Her hands smelled of industrial cleaner despite the gloves. She ate standing at the tiny counter, leftover pasta from the trattoria, cold and congealed but still edible. She was too tired to care. Tomorrow would be the same, and the day after, and the day after that. This was freedom, she reminded herself as she fell into bed. This exhaustion, this anonymity, this small gray life in a town where nobody knew her name. This was what freedom looked like. She almost believed it. The weeks passed in their familiar rhythm, each day bleeding into the next with the monotonous comfort of routine. Sophia moved through Porto Sereno like a ghost, seen but never truly noticed. The summer heat intensified, turning the streets into ribbons of shimmering air, and tourists flooded the town in greater numbers. More customers at the cafe, more parties at the trattoria, more rooms to clean at the hotel, more opportunities to disappear into the background of other people's lives. It was Elena who first mentioned the ceremony. "Have you heard?" she asked one morning at Cafe Bella Vista, her eyes bright with excitement. "Marco Leone is hosting some huge event at his villa this Saturday. Something about a charity gala for the new hospital wing. Everyone's talking about it." Sophia's hands froze mid-motion as she was wiping down the espresso machine. "Marco Leone? You know, the businessman. The really handsome one with the gray in his hair." Elena leaned in conspiratorially. "There are rumors about him, of course. People say he's connected to... well, you know. But he donates so much money to the town, and his restaurants employ half the young people here, so everyone pretended not to know what he really was." Sophia understood that game. She'd been playing it her entire life. "I don't pay attention to local politics," Sophia said carefully, returning to her cleaning with forced casualness. "It's not politics, it's drama," Elena laughed. "Apparently, he's invited all the important families from Genoa and La Spezia. There's going to be a band, catering from that fancy place in Portofino, an open bar. Giorgio was asked to provide the coffee service. He's sending both of us. The espresso machine towel slipped from Sophia's fingers. "What?" "Saturday evening. Isn't it exciting? We have to wear all black, of course. Staff uniform. But still. We'll get to see inside Villa Leona. Do you know how many people never get past those gates?" Sophia picked up the towel with trembling hands. "I can't. I have to work at the trattoria. Angelo already cleared it. Giorgio asked him. Sophia, this is a huge opportunity. The tips alone." Elena grabbed her hand, squeezing it with genuine enthusiasm. "Come on. When do we ever get to do something like this? It'll be fun. Us normal people serving the rich and pretending we're not judging their overpriced champagne tastes." There was no way to refuse without drawing suspicion. Sophia forced a smile that felt like it might crack her face in half. "Okay. Yes. That sounds fun." But in her chest, her heart was a caged bird beating itself bloody against her ribs. Marco Leone. She knew that name. Every person who'd grown up in the world of organized crime knew that name. He'd risen to power in the Liguria region 15 years ago, consolidating smaller families under his control through a combination of strategic brutality and political connections. The Valentini family had maintained careful neutrality with the Leone organization. They operated in different territories, respected each other's borders. But that was before Sophia ran, before she became Isabella, the disappeared daughter, the loose end. Had he known she was here all along? Was this some elaborate trap? Or was it coincidence, the cruelest joke the universe could play? The days leading up to Saturday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sophia considered running. She'd done it before. She could do it again. Pack the few possessions she owned, drain her meager savings account, catch a bus north to Switzerland or Austria. But something kept her in place. Maybe it was exhaustion, physical and spiritual. Maybe it was the realization that she'd been running for 7 years, and she was so desperately tired. Maybe it was the tiny, treacherous part of her that wondered what it would be like to stop pretending, just for one moment. Or maybe she'd simply forgotten how to do anything else. Saturday arrived under a cloudless sky. The summer heat was oppressive, the kind that made the air shimmer and stone walls radiate warmth even after sunset. Sophia dressed in her required black pants and white button-down shirt, pulling her hair back into a severe bun. In the cracked mirror above her sink, she studied her reflection. She looked like a server, anonymous, forgettable. She looked like Sophia Costa. But when she blinked, she could see Isabella Valentini staring back. Giorgio met them at the cafe at 5 p.m., his van packed with industrial coffee equipment and supplies. Elena chattered the entire drive up the winding road to Villa Leone, her excitement undimmed by the heat. Sophia sat in the back, watching the town grow smaller below them as they climbed into the hills. The villa appeared suddenly around a curve, a sprawling Renaissance structure of pale stone and terracotta tiles, surrounded by manicured gardens and protected by high walls. The iron gates were open, guarded by men in dark suits who checked Giorgio's credentials before waving them through. Sophia's palms were sweating. The interior courtyard was chaos, caterers rushing back and forth, florists arranging enormous displays of white roses and greenery, musicians setting up equipment on a temporary stage. Giorgio directed them to a corner of the main salon, where they'd be operating the coffee station. The room itself was breathtaking. Frescoed ceilings, marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the coastline. This was wealth beyond the comfortable prosperity of the Valentini family. This was power made visible. Elena was practically vibrating with excitement. Oh my God, Sophia, look at those chandeliers. And is that a real Caravaggio? I don't know, Sophia murmured, her eyes scanning the room compulsively, looking for exits, looking for threats, looking for him. Guests began arriving as the sun started its descent toward the horizon. Sophia and Elena fell into their routine, brewing espresso, preparing cappuccinos, arranging pastries on silver platters. The work was familiar, grounding. Sophia focused on the mechanics of it, the simple choreography of serving and smiling and staying invisible. The problem was that she recognized too many faces. The Rossetti family from Genoa. She'd met them at a wedding when she was 16. Don Castellano from La Spezia, who'd done business with her father. The Martelli brothers, who'd attended her brother's confirmation. They didn't recognize her, of course. She'd been a girl then, and now she was just another server in black and white, her face purposefully bland and unmemorable. But she recognized them, and recognition was a chain that connected her to a past she'd tried to sever. At 8:00 p.m., the room's ambient noise dropped suddenly, conversation faltering into silence. Sophia looked up from the espresso machine to see Marco Leone entering the salon. He was exactly as she remembered from the grainy photos in her father's files. Tall and commanding, his presence somehow filling the massive room. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his graying hair swept back, and he moved with the ease of a man who knew every eye was on him and welcomed it. But it wasn't his appearance that made Sophia's breath catch. It was the way he walked directly to the center of the room, positioned himself before the fireplace, and raised his hand for silence. "My friends," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly, "thank you for joining me this evening. We gather tonight ostensibly to celebrate the new hospital wing that our collective generosity has made possible." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. "But I confess I have an ulterior motive for this assembly." Marco's cold gray eyes scanned the room, and for one heart-stopping moment, they landed directly on Sophia. "I have an announcement to make, one that concerns all of you and the future of our business relationships." Next to Sophia, Elena whispered, "This is so dramatic. Rich people are wild." Sophia couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 7 years ago, Marco continued, the Valentini family of Sicily lost something precious. Their youngest child disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Some speculated she'd been kidnapped. Others suggested she'd been killed by rivals. But I knew the truth. No. I knew she'd run away. I knew she wanted to disappear, to become someone else. And I respected that choice. For 7 years I've known exactly where she was, and I've protected that secret. The room erupted in whispers. Sophia felt Elena turn to stare at her, confusion written across her face. Marco's eyes never left Sophia. "But the time for secrets is over. Isabella Valentini, Sophia Costa, as she's been calling herself, has been living here in Porto Sereno under my watch. She's worked 3 jobs to survive, refused her inheritance, tried to bury her name. But blood doesn't disappear, and neither do debts. Sophia's legs wouldn't work. She was rooted to the spot behind the coffee station, 100 faces turning to look at her. Recognition dawning in eyes that had passed over her 1,000 times in the past 7 years. "Your father is dying, Isabella," Marco said, his voice softer now, but still carrying. "He's asked to see you, and the Valentini territory, your family's legacy, hangs in the balance. Your brother Paolo cannot hold it alone. Rivals are already circling." "Sophia?" Elena's voice was small, frightened. "What is he talking about?" Marco extended his hand toward her, an invitation and a command. "Come out of the shadows, Isabella Valentini. It's time to come home." The salon was utterly silent. 100 people, criminals, politicians, businessmen who were all 3, waited for her response. Sophia looked down at her hands. They were shaking. These hands that had served coffee and cooked pasta and scrubbed bathrooms. These hands that had tried so hard to be clean. "I'm not Isabella Valentini anymore," she said, her voice cracking. "Aren't you?" Marco tilted his head slightly. "Is that why your brother Paolo has been frantically searching for you?" Is that why your father's doctors say he refuses treatment until he sees you one last time? You can pretend to be Sofia Costa, but pretending doesn't change what you are, who you are. I don't want that life, and yet it wants you. Elena grabbed Sofia's arm. Sofia, let's go. Let's just leave. We don't have to. She can't leave, Marco interrupted smoothly. Because if she walks out that door tonight, the protection I've extended her for 7 years ends. And every family in this room has enemies who would be very interested to know where the Valentini heiress has been hiding. It was a threat wrapped in courtesy, a cage made of words. Sofia felt something crack inside her chest, a dam that had been holding back 7 years of tears, rage, and exhaustion. Why? She demanded, her voice breaking. Why now? Why couldn't you just let me be nobody? For the first time, something like sympathy flickered across Marco's face. Because nobody is safe when wars are coming, Isabella. And like it or not, you're a general's daughter. You have responsibilities. I have 3 jobs. The words burst out of her, louder than she'd intended. I work 19 hours a day. I'm tired. I just wanted to be tired from normal work, not from carrying your family name, Marco finished quietly. I understand. But understanding doesn't change reality. The room was watching her breakdown with the fascinated horror of people witnessing a car accident. Elena's hand was still on her arm, trembling. Sofia closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw 2 paths. One led back to the life she'd fled, power and violence and blood. The other led, where? She'd already tried running. She'd run for 7 years. And here she was, cornered in a mansion full of criminals, her carefully constructed invisibility shattered beyond repair. There was no path that didn't hurt. She opened her eyes and met Marco's gaze. If I go see my father, will you let Elena go? She doesn't know anything. She's not part of this world. Of course, Marco said immediately. Your friend is free to leave any time. Elena's grip tightened. I'm not leaving you, Sofia, or Isabella, or whoever. I'm not leaving. Despite everything, Sofia felt a rush of affection for this woman, who'd been her only real friend in 7 years. You have to, she said gently. Please, Elena, just go. Forget you ever knew me. That's not how friendship works. Elena. Sofia turned to look at her directly. I'm dangerous to know. I always have been. I'm sorry I lied to you. I'm sorry for everything. But please, just go. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she released Sofia's arm. This is insane, she whispered. This whole thing is insane. I know. Elena backed away slowly, her face a mask of hurt and confusion, before turning and nearly running for the door. The crowd parted for her, and then she was gone, taking with her the last piece of Sofia Costa's normal life. Sofia untied her apron with steady hands and set it on the coffee station. She stepped out from behind the table, into the center of the room, and walked toward Marco Leone. Each step felt like crossing an ocean. When she reached him, she said clearly, My name is Isabella Valentini, and I want to see my father. Marco smiled. Not cruel, but not kind either. Welcome home. The drive south to Sicily took all night. Marco provided a car and driver, but he himself did not accompany her. This is a family matter, he'd said simply. I've done my part. Sofia, Isabella, couldn't sleep during the journey. She watched the darkness outside the window give way to dawn, watched the landscape shift from Ligurian coast to Tuscan hills. To the rougher terrain of the south, every kilometer took her further from the life she'd built and closer to the one she'd fled. She'd left her apartment without packing, left her few possessions, her name tag from the cafe, the small potted basil plant Elena had given her last Christmas, left Sofia Costa behind like a snake shedding dead skin. The Valentini estate appeared just as the sun was cresting the horizon. The villa sat on a hillside overlooking the Mediterranean, surrounded by olive groves and the distinctive stone walls of Sicily. Security guards waved the car through the gates after a brief inspection. Isabella's heart was a stone in her chest. The front door opened before the car had even stopped, and Paolo emerged. Her brother had changed. His face was harder, thinner, etched with stress she'd never seen before. But when he saw her climbing out of the car, his expression crumbled. "Bella," he breathed, using the childhood nickname. "Oh God, Bella, you're here." He moved to embrace her, but Isabella held up a hand, stopping him. "How did Marco Leone know where I was?" Paolo's face fell. "I told him. 2 years ago. I was desperate. I hired investigators and they found you. But when I went to bring you home, Marco's people intercepted me. He said he'd been watching you since you arrived in Porto Sereno. He said if I forced you back, you'd just run again. He convinced me to wait. So you've known for 2 years?" "Yes." "And Papa?" "He's known for 6 months. Since the diagnosis." Paolo's voice cracked. "He made me promise not to contact you, unless he was actually dying. He wanted you to have your freedom for as long as possible." The words were a knife between Isabella's ribs. "How long does he have?" "Weeks. Maybe less." They stood facing each other in the golden morning light. 7 years of absence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, Paolo said, "He's in his study. He's been waiting." The villa's interior was exactly as Isabella remembered. Marble floors, religious artwork, the smell of lemon oil and old money. Her feet carried her automatically down the familiar hallways, past the dining room where she'd had family meals, past her mother's portrait gallery, to the heavy oak door of her father's study. She knocked. "Enter," came a voice, thinner than she remembered, but unmistakably her father's. Vincenzo Valentini sat behind his massive desk, but the man who looked up at her was a ghost of the imposing figure she'd fled from. Cancer had whittled him down to essential bones, his skin gray, his once powerful frame skeletal. But his eyes, those dark eyes so like her own, were still sharp. "Bella," he said simply. And Isabella, who'd survived 7 years through sheer force of will, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to stay hidden, who'd convinced herself she felt nothing for this man and this life. Isabella broke down and sobbed. She stood in the doorway and cried like she hadn't cried since she was a child. Great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. 7 years of loneliness and fear and exhaustion poured out of her in a flood that couldn't be stopped. Vincenzo rose shakily from his chair and walked around the desk. He moved slowly, each step an effort, but he reached her and pulled her into his arms. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry you had to see what you saw. I'm sorry for what we are, for what I made us. I'm sorry you had to run. I hate you," Isabella gasped between sobs. "I hate everything you stand for. I hate what you did. I hate—" "I know, Bella. And you should." They stood like that for a long time. Father and daughter, the dying man and the girl who'd tried to escape his shadow. Finally, Isabella pulled back, wiping her face with shaking hands. "Why did you bring me back?" she demanded. "If you're dying anyway, why couldn't you just let me go?" Vincenzo returned slowly to his chair, every movement showing his pain. "Because the territory is fracturing. Paolo is strong, but he's not enough. The Cosa Nostra doesn't respect a single male heir. They need a family. And you, whether you want it or not, you're brilliant, Bella. You always were. You see connections others miss. You understand people. I served coffee for 7 years, and I'm told you were exceptional at it." A ghost of his old smile touched Vincenzo's lips. "Excellence is in your blood, daughter. Whether you're making espresso or making alliances." Isabella felt the old anger rising. "You want me to take over, to become what you are." "No," the word was firm. "I want you to become something better. The world is changing, Bella. The old ways, the violence, the brutality, they're becoming unsustainable. Law enforcement is more sophisticated. International cooperation makes hiding impossible. We need to evolve, or we'll be destroyed. We, Isabella repeated bitterly. There is no we. I'm not part of this. Aren't you? Vincenzo leaned forward. Marco Leone protected you for 7 years. Why do you think he did that? Out of kindness. I don't know. Because he wants an alliance. The Leone organization and the Valentini family together could control legitimate business throughout the South. Legal enterprises, real estate, hospitality, technology investments. He sees what I see, that the future isn't in extortion and trafficking. It's in laundering ourselves clean and becoming legitimate. Isabella laughed harshly. You can't launder blood, Papa. It doesn't wash off. Maybe not, but you can stop shedding it. Vincenzo's gaze was intense despite his weakness. You don't have to be me, Bella. You can be the bridge to something different. You spent 7 years learning how normal people live, how normal businesses operate. Use that. Transform us. And if I refuse, then Paolo will try to hold the territory alone, and he'll probably die doing it. Rivals will tear us apart. Everything your grandfather and great-grandfather built will be seized by the Cosa Nostra, or the Camorra, or worse. And the hundreds of families who depend on Valentini businesses, legitimate workers, Bella, people like those you worked alongside, will lose their livelihoods. It was manipulation, and Isabella knew it. But it was also truth. The Valentini empire wasn't just criminals. It was restaurants and construction companies and farms that employed thousands. Illegal money, yes, but also legal enterprises that fed families. The headache behind her eyes was blinding. I need time to think. Time is something I don't have, Bella. Then you should have sent for me sooner. The words burst out of her. You should have told me you were dying. Instead, you let Marco Leone ambush me in public, humiliate me in front of everyone, destroy the life I built. Would you have come if I'd asked quietly? The question hung in the air. Isabella wanted to say yes, but she didn't know if it was true. Vincenzo coughed, a wet, painful sound. When he pulled his hand away from his mouth, there was blood on his fingers. He wiped it away casually, like it meant nothing. Stay a week, he said. Just 1 week. Let me show you what we really are, beyond what you saw the night you ran. Let me show you the people who depend on us, the good we can do alongside the harm. And then decide. A week won't change anything. Maybe not, but it's all I'm asking. Isabella looked at this man who'd terrified her, shaped her, driven her away. This dying man who was still trying to manipulate her, even from his deathbed. She should say no. She should walk out that door and keep running, find a new town, a new name, a new life. But she was so tired of running. 1 week, she said finally. And then I decide for myself. Vincenzo smiled, a real smile this time, touched with genuine relief. That's all I need. The week that followed was the strangest of Isabella's life. Paolo became her guide, showing her the vast network of Valentini operations with a patience she didn't remember him possessing. They visited construction sites building affordable housing, toured the family's olive processing plants, met with managers of legitimate restaurants and export businesses. 60% of our operations are legal, Paolo explained as they drove through the Sicilian countryside. That percentage has been growing every year. Papa started the transition decades ago. And the other 40%? Protection rackets, mostly. Gambling. Some smuggling, though Papa's been trying to phase that out. The old guard resists change. They stopped at a small factory that produced ceramic tiles. The owner, a man in his 50s with paint-stained hands, greeted Paolo warmly, and was introduced to Isabella as Bella, Vincenzo's daughter. The man's eyes widened with respect. "Your father saved this business," he said earnestly. 10 years ago, the bank was going to foreclose. He bought our debt, restructured it, gave us time to rebuild. Now we employ 30 people, 30 families, who eat because of the Valentini family. After they left, Isabella said. And how many families don't eat because of what we do? Paolo was quiet for a long moment. "I won't lie to you, Bella. Our hands aren't clean. We've hurt people. Papa's hurt people, I've hurt people. But we're trying to build something different. It's not redemption. There's no redemption for what we've done. But maybe it's mitigation." On the 4th day, they visited their mother's grave. Maria Valentini had died when Isabella was 12, cancer taking her just as it was now taking Vincenzo. They stood in the small cemetery overlooking the sea, and Paolo placed fresh flowers on the headstone. "She hated what Papa did," Paolo said quietly. "But she loved him anyway. She used to say that people aren't their worst actions, that we're all capable of change. Do you believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what's the point?" That evening, Marco Leone arrived at the villa. Isabella had been expecting him. This whole week had been leading to this confrontation. She met him in the formal sitting room, Paolo at her side. Marco looked the same as he had at the ceremony, immaculately dressed, radiating controlled power. But his expression was less cold than it had been that night. "Isabella," he said, inclining his head slightly. "Thank you for seeing me. Did I have a choice?" "There's always a choice." He sat without being invited, crossing his legs with casual confidence. "I want to explain why I did what I did, why I revealed you publicly, so you could force me back here, so I could protect you." Marco corrected. "Do you think you were the only one who knew where you were? I had 3 different organizations ask me about the waitress in Porto Sereno, who looked remarkably like the missing Valentini girl. I told them they were mistaken, but rumors have a way of persisting." Isabella felt cold. "How many people knew?" "Enough that it was becoming dangerous. Your father's illness made you a target. If he died and you remained missing, there would be a power vacuum. People would come looking for you to eliminate any future claim to the territory. By bringing you back publicly, under my protection and your father's acknowledgement, I made it clear that you're not a loose end to be tied up. You're an active player. I don't want to be an active player. And yet here you are." Marco leaned forward. "Isabella, I knew your mother. Did you know that? Before she married your father, she worked as a teacher in Palermo. She was brilliant, idealistic, determined to change the world through education. What's your point?" "My point is that marrying into this life didn't destroy who she was. She opened schools, funded scholarships, used Valentini money to create opportunities for children who would never have had them otherwise. She stayed herself while operating within the system. My mother died. We all die. The question is what we do with the time we have. Isabella wanted to hate this man, but he was making it difficult. What do you want from me, Marco? An alliance, your family's territory and my organization working together toward legitimate business. Your father and I have been planning it for years, but we need you to make it work. Why me? Because you're clean. You spent 7 years outside this world. You understand how normal society functions, how legitimate business operates. You can be the face of the new Valentini empire, the bridge between what we were and what we're becoming. You want me to be your puppet. I want you to be a partner," Marco said firmly, "with real authority, real decision-making power. Your father has already signed over 51% of legitimate operations to you. Paolo retains control of the traditional business, but he reports to you on how to transition out of it." Isabella looked at Paolo, who nodded. "It's true. Papa drew up the papers 2 days ago. If you accept, you become the legal head of the family. And if I refuse? Then the papers get destroyed, and we proceed without you, Marco said. But we'll be weaker, vulnerable. And the people who depend on us, the workers, the families, even the towns that rely on our legitimate businesses, they'll suffer in the chaos. It was the same argument her father had made. But this time, Isabella heard it differently, because she'd spent the week seeing those people, meeting the factory workers, the restaurant staff, the farmers who leased Valentini land, people like Giorgio and Angelo and Elena. Normal people just trying to survive, whose lives were inadvertently entangled with the empire her family had built. I need to speak with my father, she said. She found Vincenzo in his bedroom, propped up against pillows, looking frailer than he had even days before. The cancer was accelerating, consuming him from within. A nurse sat in the corner, but Vincenzo dismissed her with a wave when Isabella entered. "You've made your decision," he said. It wasn't a question. Isabella sat in the chair beside his bed. "Tell me the truth, Papa. All of it. The night I ran. The man you had killed in our garden. Who was he?" Vincenzo's eyes closed briefly. "Antonio Russo. He was my partner for 20 years, and he was selling information to the Camorra that would have gotten your brother killed. So you executed him." "Yes. In our home, where I could see." "That was a mistake," Vincenzo admitted. "I thought you were asleep. I never wanted you to witness that, Bella. Never wanted you to see that side of what I do. But it's what you are. What we are. It's part of what we are. Not all." Vincenzo reached out, and after a moment, Isabella took his hand. His skin was paper thin, bones prominent beneath. "I won't lie to you anymore, daughter. I've killed people. I've ordered deaths. I've done terrible things in the name of family and power. But I've also built hospitals, funded orphanages, kept entire communities from starving during economic collapses. We're not heroes, but we're not only villains either. That doesn't balance out." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. But it's the truth of who we are. Complicated, flawed, human." Isabella squeezed his hand. "If I do this, if I take control, I do it my way. No more executions, no more violence unless absolutely necessary for defense. We accelerate the transition to legitimate business. And anyone who doesn't like it can leave. The old guard will resist. Then the old guard can find new employment." A smile ghosted across Vincenzo's lips. "You sound like your mother. Is that why you're dying? Because you're trying to change things and someone didn't like it?" The question hung heavy in the air. Finally, Vincenzo said, "The cancer is real, Bella. But yes, I've made enemies by pushing for reform. If I'd stayed silent, maybe I'd have a few more years. But what would be the point? To preserve a system that needs to die? You're dying to destroy your own empire. I'm dying to transform it into something my daughter can lead without shame. Into something your mother would have been proud of." He coughed, his body convulsing with the effort. When he could speak again, his voice was weaker. "I know I'm asking you to carry a heavy burden. But you're strong enough, Bella. Stronger than Paolo, stronger than me. You proved that by surviving 7 years on your own, by building a life from nothing. That life is gone now. Then build a new one that uses your strength for something better." Isabella sat with her father until he fell asleep, his hand still in hers. She watched his chest rise and fall with labored breaths, and felt the weight of generations settling on her shoulders. The Valentini name, the Valentini blood, the Valentini empire, with all its sins and possibilities. When she finally left his room, Paolo was waiting in the hallway. "I heard," he said simply. "You were listening?" "Of course. No apology, just fact." "So? What are you going to do?" Isabella looked at her brother, this man who'd searched for her for years, who'd respected her choice to disappear even as it tore him apart, who now offered her the reins of an empire he could have kept for himself. "I'm going to do something incredibly stupid," she said. "I'm going to try to change the world." Paolo's face split into a genuine smile, the first she'd seen from him in years. "Thank God. I was so tired of doing this alone." The next morning, Isabella called Marco Leone and accepted his partnership terms. By afternoon, lawyers had finalized the paperwork. By evening, word had spread through the organization that Isabella Valentini was back, and she was taking control. The meeting with the old guard was scheduled for the following day. Paolo warned her it wouldn't be easy. "Some of these men have been with the family for 40 years, he said as they prepared. "They remember when power came from fear, not negotiations. They won't like taking orders from a woman, especially one who ran away. Then they'll have to get used to disappointment." The conference room in the villa's east wing was full when Isabella entered. 20 men, ranging from their 40s to their 70s, all dressed in expensive suits, all radiating skepticism and barely concealed hostility. These were the captains, the soldiers, the men who'd built their lives on Valentini blood and money. Isabella walked to the head of the table and remained standing. Paolo stood behind her, a silent show of support. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "I know most of you think I'm not qualified to lead this family, that I abandoned you, that I'm weak, that I don't understand how things work. You're partially right. I don't understand how things work, the old way, and I'm not interested in learning." Murmurs rippled through the room. An older man with gray hair and a scar across his cheek leaned forward. "With respect, signorina, you can't just change decades of tradition because you spent a few years playing waitress." "I'm not asking your permission, Salvatore," Isabella said calmly. "I'm informing you of what's going to happen. The Valentini family is transitioning to legitimate business. Over the next 5 years, we will phase out all protection rackets, gambling operations, and smuggling. We will invest in legal enterprises, technology, hospitality, real estate development. Anyone who wants to be part of that future is welcome. Anyone who doesn't can leave with a generous severance package, and our thanks for your past service." "You'll make us weak," another man shouted. "The Cosa Nostra, the Camorra, they'll eat us alive." "We'll have the Leone organization as allies," Isabella countered. "Marco Leone controls the North. Combined, we'll be stronger than any of them. But we'll be legitimate, untouchable by law enforcement, able to operate openly." "Fairy tales," Salvatore spat. "You can't wash blood off with paperwork." "No," Isabella agreed. "But you can stop shedding it. You can build something that doesn't require your children to choose between family and conscience. You can create an empire that lasts beyond the next police raid or rival attack. Your father tried this," an older man said quietly. "It's why he's dying. Someone poisoned him for trying to change things." The room went silent. Isabella looked at Paolo, who nodded grimly, confirmation of what she'd suspected. "Then we'll find who did it," Isabella said, her voice hard as steel, "and we'll make sure everyone knows the cost of betraying this family. But we'll do it once, decisively, and then we move forward. No more endless cycles of revenge, no more wars that consume generations." "You're asking us to become something we're not," Salvatore said. "I'm asking you to become something better, or at least something sustainable." Isabella placed her palms flat on the table. "Look, I'm not naive. I know some of you will never accept this. Some of you will leave. Some might even try to fight me. But this is happening. My father spent his last month setting this in motion. Marco Leone supports it. Paolo supports it. And I have 51% legal control of all legitimate operations. The old business? She glanced at her brother. Paolo will manage the transition out of it, quietly and carefully. But it ends. The room erupted in argument, some men shouting support, others opposition, many simply confused. Isabella let them argue for a few minutes before raising her hand for silence. "I'm not my father," she said when they'd quieted. "I'm not going to rule through fear or tradition. But I am a Valentini, and this family will survive, with you or without you. The choice is yours." One by one, the men made their decisions. Some stood and left immediately, 5 in total, including Salvatore. Others stayed, pledging their support with varying degrees of enthusiasm. A few approached Isabella afterward with questions, suggestions, concerns. By the end, she had 15 of the original 20. Not overwhelming, but enough. Paolo found her later in the garden, sitting beneath the olive trees, where she used to play as a child. The sun was setting over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "You did well," he said, sitting beside her. "I lost 5 captains. You kept 15 who would have laughed in my face if I'd proposed the same changes. They respect you, Bella. Maybe because you're right, or maybe because they know you've already walked away from all of this once, so your threats aren't empty." Isabella plucked an olive from a low branch, rolling it between her fingers. "I keep thinking about Elena, about Giorgio and Angelo, about all the normal people whose lives I just left. They probably think I used them. Did you?" "No. I loved that life. I loved the simplicity of it, the honest exhaustion, waking up and knowing exactly what my day would be." She looked at her brother. "I loved being nobody. You were never nobody, Bella. You were just pretending. Maybe. But it was a good pretense." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Finally, Paolo said, "Papa wants to see you. He's asking for you." Isabella found her father in his study one last time, sitting in his leather chair despite the nurse's protests. He looked worse than the morning, his skin almost translucent, his breathing labored, but his eyes were clear. "You held the meeting," he said. "Lost 5 men, kept 15. That's 14 more than I expected." Vincenzo gestured to a wooden box on his desk. "Open it." Inside was a pendant, a gold medallion with the Valentini family crest, worn smooth by generations of hands. Isabella's grandmother had worn it, her great-grandmother before that. "It's yours now," Vincenzo said. "Not as jewelry, as responsibility, as legacy." Isabella lifted the pendant, feeling its weight. "I'm scared, Papa. What if I can't do this? What if I fail?" "Then you fail. But you fail trying to build something better, not maintaining something broken." He reached out and she took his hand again. "I'm proud of you, Bella. Not because you came back, but because you survived leaving. You're stronger than any of us ever were. I'm not strong. I'm terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you careful. It's arrogance that gets you killed." They talked through the night, about her mother, about childhood memories, about the business and its future. As dawn light began filtering through the windows, Vincenzo's voice grew weaker, his pauses between sentences longer. "Bella," he whispered finally. "Thank you for coming home." "Thank you for letting me go," she replied. Vincenzo Valentini died 3 days later, with his children at his bedside, and the sun rising over the Mediterranean. The funeral was attended by hundreds. Family members, business associates, politicians, criminals, and surprisingly, many of the workers from his legitimate businesses who'd never known about his other life. Isabella stood at the graveside next to her mother's plot, wearing black and the Valentini medallion, and felt the weight of her new identity settling into place. She wasn't Sofia Costa anymore, but she wasn't quite Isabella Valentini either. She was something new, forged from 7 years of exile and 1 week of reckoning. Marco Leone approached after the ceremony, offering his condolences with formal courtesy. "Your father was a complicated man," he said, "but he died knowing his legacy was in capable hands." "I'm not sure I believe that." "Believe it. You're already making changes he couldn't. The old guard respects you because you're not trying to be him." Marco paused. "There's something you should know. We found who poisoned your father." Isabella's blood went cold. "Who?" "Antonio Russo's son. He's been working as a supplier for the past 6 years, waiting for his chance. We have him in custody. What would you like done?" This was her first real test. How she'd handle betrayal, violence, revenge. The old Isabella would have demanded blood. Sofia Costa would have called the police. But the new Isabella, this hybrid creature she was becoming, had to find a third way. "Let me talk to him," she said. They brought Russo's son to the villa that evening, a man in his 30s, defiant even in chains. Isabella met him in the same room where her father used to conduct business, Paolo and Marco flanking her. "You killed my father." The man spat. "You murdered him in cold blood." "My father killed your father because he betrayed us," Isabella replied evenly. "I'm not going to justify it. It was brutal. It was traumatic. I witnessed it, and it destroyed my childhood. But it happened, and we can't undo it. So you'll kill me now? Continue the cycle?" "No," Isabella leaned forward. "I'm going to give you a choice. You can die here tonight. Payment for payment. Blood for blood. Or you can leave Italy with enough money to start over somewhere else, on the condition that you never return and never seek revenge again. Your choice." The man stared at her in disbelief. "Why?" "Because I'm trying to build something different. Because I'm tired of death. Because my father died trying to end this cycle, and I'm not going to dishonor that by starting it again." She stood. "You have until morning to decide. If you choose life, you'll be on a plane to Argentina by noon tomorrow, with papers and money. If you choose death, we'll make it quick. Those are your options." Marco and Paolo both tried to object after the man was taken away, arguing it was too risky, too weak, too dangerous. But Isabella held firm. "This is how it's going to be," she said. "We give people chances. We offer alternatives to violence. And yes, sometimes that might backfire. But it's the only way forward." Russo's son chose life. By the following afternoon, he was gone, and Isabella had made her first decision as the head of the Valentini family, one that broke with decades of tradition. Over the following months, the transformation accelerated. Isabella threw herself into the work with the same intense focus she'd once applied to her 3 jobs in Porto Sereno. She was still working 19-hour days, still exhausted, still running on coffee and determination. But now she was building instead of hiding. She met with lawyers, accountants, and business consultants. She toured every Valentini operation, learning the details of each enterprise. She negotiated contracts, severed ties with criminal suppliers, and reinvested dirty money into clean ventures. It was complicated, delicate work, threading the needle between transformation and survival. The old guard resisted, as predicted. 3 more captains left. 2 tried to sabotage deals but were caught and dismissed. The Cosa Nostra tested their boundaries, but Marco Leone's public alliance held them back. And slowly, gradually, things began to change. 6 months after her father's death, Isabella stood in the opening ceremony of a new technology incubator in Palermo, funded entirely by Valentini money. Paolo was there, along with Marco and several of their remaining captains. But also present were university students, startup founders, local politicians, and journalists. "This is the future," Isabella said in her speech. "Not just for our family, but for Sicily. We've taken the resources built over generations and redirected them toward innovation, education, and opportunity. This incubator will support young entrepreneurs, create jobs, and show the world that Sicily is more than its past. The applause was genuine, enthusiastic. As she cut the ribbon, cameras flashing, Isabella caught sight of her reflection in the glass doors. A woman in a business suit, the Valentini medallion visible at her throat, her face composed and confident. She almost didn't recognize herself. That evening, as she was leaving the ceremony, a familiar voice called her name. "Bella!" She turned to find Elena pushing through the crowd, older and thinner than Isabella remembered, but unmistakably herself. They stared at each other for a long moment. "I saw the ceremony on the news," Elena said breathlessly. "I couldn't believe it was you. I had to come." "Elena," Isabella's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry. For lying. For everything." "Are you?" Elena's voice held an edge. "Because you disappeared completely. No explanation, no goodbye. I thought we were friends." "We were. We are. I couldn't contact you. It was too dangerous." "Dangerous for me or for you?" "Both." Isabella glanced around at the lingering crowd, the security, the journalists. "Can we talk somewhere private?" They ended up in a small cafe a few blocks away. Nothing like Cafe Bella Vista, but the smell of espresso was the same. They sat across from each other, and Isabella told Elena everything. The truth of who she was, why she'd run, what had happened at Villa Leone that night. Elena listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through shock, hurt, and something like understanding. When Isabella finished, she said, "So Sofia Costa never existed." "She existed. She was just part of me, the part that wanted to be normal. And now? Now I'm trying to be both, to use the power I have for something good while remembering what it was like to have nothing." Elena stirred her espresso slowly. "Giorgio asks about you sometimes. He felt terrible about sending you to that ceremony. Angelo, too. He says the kitchen hasn't been the same. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I miss them. Tell them yourself," Elena said sharply. "You have phones, don't you? Or is Isabella Valentini too important now for coffee shop owners and line cooks?" The words stung because they were partly true. Isabella had been so consumed with transformation that she'd let go of the connections that had sustained Sofia. "You're right," she admitted. "I've been so focused on changing everything that I forgot who I was trying to change it for." "So change that too," Elena suggested. "Be the crime boss who calls her old co-workers. Be the Mafia princess who still knows how to make a perfect cappuccino." Despite everything, Isabella smiled. "I do miss making cappuccinos." "Then make some. Nothing's stopping you." It was simple advice, but it resonated. Over the following weeks, Isabella made a point of staying connected to her old life. She called Giorgio and offered to help when his new espresso machine broke down. She sent Angelo recipes she'd learned from her mother. She met Elena for coffee once a month, maintaining the friendship that had kept her sane during her years of exile. She also began a new practice. Every Friday afternoon, she volunteered at a community center in Palermo, teaching business skills to young people trying to start legitimate enterprises. She used a different name. Not Sofia Costa, not Isabella Valentini, just Bella. And for those few hours each week, she was simply a person helping other people. It was a small thing, but it kept her grounded, reminded her why she was doing all of this. A year after her return, the Valentini family had divested from 80% of its criminal operations. The transition wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, conflicts, moments when Isabella wondered if she was being naive. But the trajectory was clear. They were becoming something different. Marco Leone visited one evening, finding Isabella in her father's old study. Though she'd redecorated it completely, replacing the dark leather and mahogany with lighter colors and modern furniture. "I have news," he said, accepting the glass of wine she offered. "The Cosa Nostra has formally recognized our alliance. They're calling us the reformed families. Half mockery, half respect. I'll take it. You should. It means we've succeeded. We're strong enough that they can't attack us, legitimate enough that law enforcement has no grounds to move against us. We're in the space between not criminals, not quite civilians. My mother would have liked that, Isabella said. She always said life was lived in the gray areas. Marco raised his glass. 2 gray areas, then. And to your father, who started this impossible task. And to 7 years serving coffee, Isabella added, which taught me more about people than any amount of family business ever could. They drank in comfortable silence. Finally, Marco said, "Do you regret it? Coming back?" Isabella considered the question seriously. Did she regret it? She missed the simplicity of her old life, the freedom of anonymity. But she'd also built something meaningful here, not just for herself, but for thousands of others whose lives were entangled with the Valentini name. "I regret that I had to choose," she said finally. "I regret that there was no third option where I could be Sophia and Isabella simultaneously. But given the choice I was forced to make, no, I don't regret it. Your father would be proud. Maybe. Or maybe he'd tell me I'm still too soft, too idealistic," Isabella smiled. "But I think my mother would approve." That night, alone in her room in the villa, Isabella stood before the mirror and studied her reflection. She wore comfortable clothes, jeans and a simple shirt, not the business suit she donned for meetings. The Valentini medallion hung around her neck, but her hair was loose, her face free of makeup. She looked like a hybrid creature, part Sophia, part Isabella, entirely herself. She thought about the girl who'd fled this place 7 years ago, traumatized and desperate. She thought about the woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion in Porto Sereno, hiding from her own name. And she thought about who she was now. Neither of those people, but something forged from both of them. It wasn't the life she would have chosen, but it was the life she had, and she was determined to make something beautiful from it. Through the window she could see the Mediterranean, under moonlight, the same sea that lapped at the shores of Porto Sereno, the same sea that connected all the disparate pieces of her fragmented identity. Somewhere in that distant coastal town, Café Bella Vista was probably closing for the night. Giorgio was probably counting the till while some other server, not Sophia, never Sophia again, wiped down the espresso machine one last time. Isabella felt a pang of loss for that simple life, but she also felt gratitude for what it had given her. Perspective, humility, and the understanding that power means nothing without compassion. She touched the medallion at her throat, this symbol of legacy and responsibility, and made herself a promise. She would carry the Valentini name forward, but she would carry Sofia Costa's values with it. She would transform an empire built on blood into something that created opportunities instead of victims. It was an impossible task, probably. But then again, surviving 7 years on her own had seemed impossible too. And she'd done it. Isabella Valentini. Once Sofia Costa, always a little bit both, turned from the window and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more impossible choices, more moments of doubt. But tonight, she allowed herself to rest, to be tired from work that mattered, from a burden she'd chosen rather than one she'd fled. And in that acceptance, she finally found something resembling peace.